Hello again, my name is Miss Jody of the Literacy Volunteers of Harrison County in West Virginia. I've been finding a wonderful book that has a bunch of folk tales from all over the world, and I'm not certain where this one came from, but the picture looked like it's came in a jungle, and the story is about a little boy. So I'm going to hold Christopher Robin, because you know I have Christopher Robin, because boys can be very brave. But I want you to know that also girls can be brave. So I'm going to have both a boy and a girl. I'm going to tell them both this story. And it's called The Monster Who Grew Small. And the author is Joan Graham. So there, can you see my two babies here? So I know that boys are supposed to be very brave. So it doesn't say exactly where it's coming from, but it just says, far in the south, beyond the Great Cataract, there was a small village where a certain boy lived with his uncle. The uncle was known as the Brave One because he was a hunter and killed lots of strange large animals, and he was very hard, mean to his nephew. Don't like that. Because he thought the boy was a coward. He thought this boy was afraid all the time. He tried to frighten him by telling stories of terrible monsters that lived in the forest. And the boy believed what he was told. For were not his uncle called the Brave One, the mighty hunter? I'm frightened of the crocodiles who live in the river, and of the snakes and the spiders that lie in wait for me whenever I go out. But most of all, the boy said, I'm frightened of the things which rustle in the palm trees over my bed. My uncle says they're only rats and lizards, but I know they're far worse than that. What do you want, said the hare. Now, hare is another word for a wild rabbit. But the hare said, is a house with walls 3 cubits thick. Now, cubits is thick. That's maybe almost a foot, so that's a very thick wall, where you can shut yourself away from all the things you fear. I don't think that would do any good, said the boy. For I know that if there are no windows, I would be afraid not to being able to look out and breathe. And if there were windows, I would be afraid of people watching me, things that like creep in to devour me, to eat me. Oh my, he really is afraid, isn't he? The hare seemed to have stopped being frightened, and the boy said to it, now that you know I'm not at all brave, I suppose I would need much protection. But if you feel I'd be better than nothing, I'll carry you home and tell you where I live, because the boy's been out in the woods and talking to this rabbit. To the boy's astonishment, the hare replied, I live on the moon, so you can't come with me, but I would like to give you something to show you how grateful I am for all your kindness, because the boy was so kind to the rabbit. What would you like to have more than anything in the world? He asked the boy. But as I say, girls too need courage. The boy said, I would like to have courage, but I suppose that's one thing you can't be given. Oh, I can't give it to you, but I can tell you where you can find it. Did you know that you could actually go and find courage and be a brave person? The road which leads there will have to follow alone. But we're going to have a boy and a girl. But when your fears are strongest, look up at the moon, and I'll tell you how to overcome them, how to get away from your fears. Then the hare told the boy about the road he must follow. And the next morning, before his uncle was awake, the boy set out on his journey. The only weapon he had was a dagger, it was a sharp knife. And the rabbit had given it. It was a long, keen, and pale, sharp knife. Soon the road came to a wide river. Then the boy was very frightened, for in it there floated many crocodiles. You know, crocodiles, they're pretty scary, who watched him with their evil little eyes. But he remembered what the hare told him, and after looking up at the moon, he shouted at them, if you want to be killed, come and attack me. He said that because he was brave to the crocodiles. Then he plunged into the river with his dagger clutched in his hands and began to swim to the far bank. Much to the crocodiles' surprise, they found themselves afraid of him. To try to keep up their dignity, they said to each other, he's too thin and not worth the trouble of eating. And they shut their eyes and pretended not to notice him. So the boy crossed the river safely and went on his way. After a few more days, he saw 2 snakes, each so large that they could have swallowed an ox without even getting a pain in their tummy. That must have been a big snake. But both speaking at the same time, they said loudly, "If you come one step further, we'll immediately eat you." The boy was very frightened, for the snakes were one of the things he minded the most. He was at the point of running away when he looked up at the moon, and immediately he knew what the hare wanted him to do. Now turn a page, one page. "Oh, large and intelligent serpents," he said, "a boy so small as myself could do no more than give one of you a satisfactory meal. Half of me would not be worth the trouble of digesting. Hadn't you better decide between you who would have the honor of eating me?" "Sensible, very sensible. I will eat you myself," said the first serpent. Serpent, that's another word for snake. "No, you won't. He's mine," said the other. "Nonsense. You had that rich merchant so busy looking after his gold that he didn't notice you till you got him by the legs." "Well, what about the woman?" They went on and on, arguing about who was going to eat this boy. And then he said, he wasn't. And the 2 snakes were arguing. While the serpents were busy arguing which one of them would eat the boy, he slipped past them without them even noticing. And he was already out of sight. So that morning, neither of the snakes had a breakfast. The boy felt so cheerful that he began to whistle. For the first time, he found himself enjoying shapes of the trees, because he'd been afraid of them before. They were dark and shady. He enjoyed the shapes of the trees and the colors of the flowers, instead of wondering what dangers they might be hiding. Soon he came in sight of a village, and even in the distance he could hear a sound of lamentation. That's whoa, whoa, whoa. All the people were complaining, whoa. As he walked down the single street, no one took a notice of this boy. They were too busy wailing and moaning. The cooking fires were not lit. The goats were bleeding because nobody had bothered to feed them. And a small girl was yelling because she had fallen down and cut her knee, and her mother wasn't even interested. Those villagers were very strange. When the boy went to the house of the head man, that was the very boss man of the village, he saw him sitting cross-legged with ashes on his head, his eyes shut, and he had his fingers in his ear. Do you sometimes do that when you hear bad noises? The boy had to shout very loud to make him hear. Then the old man opened one ear, sort of peeked out, and growled, "What do you want?" "Nothing," the boy said. "I just wanted to want to know what you wanted. Why is your village so unhappy?" "You'd be unhappy too," the man said, "if you were going to be eaten by a monster." "Who's going to eat you?" "Me and everybody else, even the goats. Can't you hear them bleeding?" The boy was too polite to suggest that the goats were only bleeding because they were hungry. Nobody had given them any food, and they hadn't milked them, because goats you milk them like you milk a cow. So he asked the head man, "There seems to be quite a lot of your people in the village. Couldn't you get together and kill the monster if you all worked together?" "Impossible. He's too big, too fierce, too terrible." We all agreed on that. "What does the monster look like?" asked the boy. "They say it has the head of a crocodile, the body of a hippopotamus, and the tail like a very fat snake." That would make it even worse. "Don't talk about it." He put his hands over his eyes and rocked back and forth, and well, the boy was pretty strange for this. He's the boss man. Usually they know everything and how to handle it. "If you tell me where the monster lives, I will try to kill it for you," said the boy. Much to his own surprise, he surprised himself how fact that he was feeling a little brave. "You feel brave? You feel brave now?" "Perhaps you are wise," said the head man, "but then you will be eaten first, and you won't have any time to think about it. The monster lives in a cave at the top of the mountain. The smoke you can see comes from his fiery breath. You'll be cooked before you're eaten." The boy looked up to the moon, and he knew what the hare wanted him to say. "I will go to the mountain, and I will challenge the monster." Climbing the mountain took him a long time, but when he was halfway up, he could see the monster quite clearly. Basking in the mouth of the cave, its fiery breath whooshing out of its monsters. Now we know about that, could be really scary. It looked 3 times the size as a big boat, which is very big. The boy said to himself, I won't look at it again until I've climbed all the distance between me and the cave. Otherwise, I might too feel like running away and I won't be able to climb. The next time he looked, the monster seemed to be a bit larger than it seemed farther away. Oh, I'm sorry, I said that. The next time he saw the monster, he expected it to look larger, but it was getting a little smaller. Instead of the big boat, it looked like only 2 boats. The monster in front of him snorted angrily. He flared down the flames coming down the mountain. He ran back a rather long way to make himself stop. Now the monster seems to have grown larger again. It was quite the size of 3 boats. The boy said to himself, this is very curious indeed. The farther I run away from the monster, the larger it seems. And the nearer I am to it, the smaller it seems. Perhaps if I was very close, it might be a reasonable size for me to kill it with my dagger. So that he could not be blinded by the fiery breath, he shut his eyes. He ran toward them with his eyes shut. Then he thought he might drop the dagger. He clasped it very high, tight in his hands. So he would not have time to start being frightened. He ran as fast as he could right up to the mouth of the cave. When he opened his eyes, he couldn't see anything that needed killing. The cave seemed empty, and he began to think that he must have run in the wrong direction. Then he felt something hot touch his right foot. He looked down, and there was the monster, and it was small as a frog. Now I figured that it was so small that it was about the size of this kitten. So we're going to put this kitten in my lap. He picked it up, scratched its back, and it was no more comfortably warm to hold, and it made a small friendly sound halfway between a purr and the simmer of a cooking pot. So it did purr, just like this kitten. The boy thought, poor little monster. It will feel so lonely in this enormous cave. Then he thought, it might make a nice pet. Fiery breath would come in handy for lighting a cooking fire. Well, this kitten certainly was not making a cooking fire. So he carried it carefully down the mountain, and it curled up in his hand, and it went to sleep. Now we have the boy and my girl. Oh, this little girl, by the way, her name is Greta. She came from England. So we know Christopher Robin, but this is Greta. So they went back to the village. When the villagers saw the boy, at first they thought they must be dreaming, for they had been sure the monster would kill him. Then they acclaimed him as a hero, saying, honor to the mighty hunter. He's the bravest of all. He's slain the monster. The boy felt very embarrassed, and as soon as he could make himself heard, he said, wait, let me tell you. I didn't kill it. I brought it home as a pet. They thought that was only modesty becoming our hero, and before they could believe him, he had to explain how the monster had seemed only so big when it was very far away. He said the nearer he got to it, the smaller it grew, until at last, when he was standing beside it, he could pick it up in his hand. That's how small this monster was. The people crowded around to see the monster. It woke up, yawned, and gave a little puff of smoke, and it began to purr. Well, we know about that. So our little Greta and Christopher are holding the monster. A little girl said to the boy, what's its name? I don't know, the boy said. I never asked it. It was the monster himself who answered the question. So this monster, this little tiny kitten, is the monster. He stopped purring. He looked around to make sure that everybody was listening. And then he said, I have many names. Some call me famine. That's when you're really hungry and there's no food. Some call me pestilence. That's sort of like what we're going around with this COVID, where there's just a disease. So everybody was afraid of it. But he said, the saddest of humans give me its own name. And the kitten yawned again, and then he said, most people would call me what might happen. And that's what we're afraid of. Sometimes we don't even know what's going to happen, so we're so afraid, so we run away instead of going and facing our fears. And when we face our fears, we find we can really happen them. So our boy And Greta, our girl, tamed the wild monster and realized that they could handle almost anything. So if you're afraid of something, you think about it, you ask a friend, or you just say, I'm not going to let that thing bother me, and then you're going to be okay. So isn't that a lovely story? I don't know where it came from, but this Joan lady wrote it, and I hope you enjoyed this story. So come again to Literacy Volunteers, and we'll tell you some more stories. So give us share, or give us like, or even subscribe, and then you'll see most of our stories. Thank you for coming.